So, part two. Part two is when they tell a police officer to slow down, sometimes they'll say, you need to meditate to slow yourself down. My personal impression is the slow down that a police officer needs to take, or first responder, is you need to go back to your base. And in medicine and nursing, we call those your activities of daily living. What makes you feel more stable? And that stability a lot of times is basic things like some people like to read books. That's personally not me, but a lot of people like to do that. I personally will sit and take a bath for 2 hours. If you find me in a hot tub, I'll be out. That's where Katie is, right? And that's where I go, and that's where I disconnect. But you've got to go, when you slow down, you've got to choose something that disconnects you. And whether that could be golf, but it's something that slows you down, not necessarily meditation, because meditation may add more stress to you because you don't even know how to meditate. So find something that used to give you joy that you've not done in a while, that makes life feel like it's going at a slower pace. And that sometimes will help you to get caught up.
Yeah, and it's not always easy.
It's not easy.
I mean, I think you just, at some point you got to finally just say or recognize I am struggling mentally. Nobody, if you get sick in the wintertime, you acknowledge that right off the bat. You have no issues going to the doctor to get help, to get better. We have to change. We have to bring that mentality into the mental aspect of it too,
right? And
say, hey, I'm just not right up there,
Right. And I think, so when you go slow down, so say if you want to go play golf, 18 holes or whatever, and say you go play golf, and the whole time you're sitting there.
And I would win against her, just so you know. Yeah, you're not beating me in golf.
He talks big when he's on the screen. But if you're going to go play golf, and you're playing 18 holes, instead of thinking about your next shot that's 75 yards away and trying to figure out, if you need to, whatever wedge you need to use,
a little gap wedge, maybe.
Then and you're thinking about yesterday's work event. Still,
that's the problem.
There's where you need to differentiate. Wait a minute, something's wrong because I can't clear my mind. So if someone's out there ruminating, and what we've talked about rumination before, but rumination is you can't drop it. You can't drop it. You can't drop it. And then you get fear. And then you have to over control. And then you get fear. And then you have to over control. And then you just can't get it off your mind. That's when you need help. Because there's structures in your mind that can be built up to be stronger, that allow you to have the mental health discipline that you need in order to stay healthy. So on a dime's notice, if you're a first responder or a veteran, your job tells you, get up and go. If you can't get up and clear your mind and focus on the task at hand, you need help. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's that your brain it's almost like it's got too much sand in one jar and not enough sand in the other jar. And then what the ketamine does, or the psychedelics that they call them, so ketamine's going to be the godfather of the psychedelics. But if you've got too much sand in one jar and not enough sand in the other jar, ketamine's going to help you to put the sand in jars to where you start getting that balance back. And then the cool thing about it is you start feeling like yourself again. And is it easy? No. Because anytime you're in a survival mode in life and you got to slow down, if you're running and you run a course, the same course every day, eventually you're going to start to notice the trees to the side, the birds, the houses, the colors. If you're constantly just running for survival, you don't notice anything. So when we can slow that down, then you start noticing all these things around you. You're like, oh my gosh, why did I not notice these things before? And you didn't notice them before because you were in a survival period. So once you slow yourself down, and I'm sure Dave could talk about this more than I can, but when you slow yourself down and you start looking around you, then you're like, I had no idea how much effect it had on I knew it did on my wife, but I hadn't really, I couldn't connect with it, or I couldn't connect with my kids, so.
Some of my fans, they're my fans, hey guys! Oh yeah. I'll be honest with you. Oh, we're outside. We're at
Tap 40.
In
In
doing a little
Knoxville,
unit.
fundraiser.
Hey, yeah. So that's one thing that over time,
Keep going. They know it's here.
that's one thing over time that I have learned to realize, and also finally talking to my family a little bit about it. Is
But being vulnerable enough to feel that way.
Yeah,
you can't be vulnerable when you're surviving.
No.
You can't. It
No.
doesn't go together.
No,
you don't want to be
absolutely
vulnerable to the
not.
bear while you're running away from it because you're running.
But what I learned is it just didn't affect me, and it affected the whole family. I mean, my daughters, my wife.
And you knew it did. When you're going through it, you knew it did. But you couldn't empathetically connect with it.
No.
And that's the difference. So here's the thing, too. When you go out and you start getting help, and you see all this stuff around you, you got to have a little grace for yourself. Because you got to recognize you were going through some hellacious conditions.
Yeah,
and you were doing the best you can do, and that's all you could do.
But that's not easy to do.
No, it's not easy.
I mean, it's not. As I said, it took me. And the biggest thing is, you gotta ask. Don't be afraid to ask for questions, ask for help. But I felt like the booster was maybe a failure. That I was
You did, yeah,
I was failing with the treatments, and that's the boosters is far from failing. And so if I would have asked that in the beginning, I would have saved myself a lot of undue worrying. Well, I would have probably worried about something else, but what I'm learning is you just ask. I mean, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask questions, because I was an officer. I was a police officer. You asked me when you had law questions. Well, how can I expect to know medical and psychological questions and answers?
I don't know, but for a long time he would question that I was wrong every time. Finally, I had to go back and get my second master's degree.
See, this is
in order.
Listen, if anybody can make me a couple of master's degree certificates, let's go Yale. I would say Harvard, but everybody would know that's not possible. But some Yale certificates, so I can put them on my wall, I would appreciate it. But yeah, as an officer, you're approached for answers quite a bit. Okay, yeah. and then for me, I didn't have answers for my questions, so I didn't ask those questions. So I think help's the hardest thing to ask for.
Well, and I think recognizing too, like whenever they used to come into the hospital and work there, and they would do, all your audits and stuff from the national people, they would always say, don't ever say you don't know an answer, but always say, let me get you someone who does. And that's with every professional in the world. Because if you don't, and we're not trained that way. We're trained that if you don't know the answer, it looks like a weakness. No. Like, you're not intended to know everything. But we've got to find people that we trust that we can turn to.
Yeah.
I think trust with officers, first responders, and nurses. And I'll tell you, do I trust other nurses? I love other nurses. I think other nurses work their tails off. But honestly, I need to sit there for a while in order for me to understand trust with them.
Oh, absolutely, and that's I've been very fortunate to know some individuals that have gone through the treatment process like me, and the one thing I'll say about them all is that they've said if they've asked a question to a therapist or whatever, and it somewhat pertained to the job, I mean the therapist didn't try to hee-haw around the question and make it sound somewhat like he knew what he was saying. He just said, I don't know that I can answer that question because I've never